If you have to deploy an Oracle database on AWS Cloud, you have three options. You can either deploy them into an EC2 instance, which is nothing but a virtual machine, typically using the same method that you do in on-premise, but on AWS Cloud inside a virtual machine. Or you can deploy a relational data service or RDS, which is a fully managed Oracle database on AWS Cloud. And within RDS, you have two options. You can either do Amazon RDS, where everything is managed by AWS, you just access the database, or you have RDS Custom, which was introduced in late 2021 or early 2022, where you also have access to the virtual machine, or the option is a little bit more flexible. You have much more control over the machine on which your Oracle database is deployed. What are these three different options? And step-by-step instructions on how to create a Amazon RDS or Oracle RDS on Amazon Cloud. We're going to cover all this in this episode. Hi, this is Atul from team K21Academy. And to give a little bit background, this video is taken from our Amazon AWS Solution Architect Certification Training Program. In that, one of the module is Oracle databases, or one of the module is the databases options available on AWS Cloud, and there are multiple databases. And one of the topic within that is about Oracle Relational Data Services. And the video, there was a three-part video series. I've merged all these into one single, so you have everything here available for you. Also, while you're watching this video, you might have some references to other part of my training. Skip them or ignore them. So focus on creating a Amazon RDS for Oracle on AWS Cloud. Now, if you have any questions, leave them under comments, or if you have successfully created the database, let me know about that as well. It will help others. And if you like this video, don't forget to share and subscribe to our YouTube channel. In this video, we're going to look at how to create and connect an Oracle RDS, which is a Relational Data Services instance on AWS Cloud. So to give you some context or the flow, as you're already familiar, there are different ways or different databases you can create on AWS Cloud. Like you can have a Amazon Aurora, you can have MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and so on. So in this video, we're going to talk about Oracle database, and within Oracle, there are different deployment models. So I'll explain those as well. Now, before we move forward, as we always do in other labs as well, this is how the step-by-step activity guide is going to look like. So first, we'll begin with the introduction, which I'm going to cover in this particular video. And then we'll also talk about the deployment models, like different ways in which Oracle database can be deployed on AWS. And then we are going to pick up one, which is the fully managed RDS. And within that fully managed RDS, what are the options available? We'll be talking about that as well. And then I'm going to look at creating the step-by-step instructions on creating. We'll look at in AWS Cloud as well. You will also have the documentation link. So whatever documents we have used in order to prepare this document, as well as some supporting documents that will help you if you want to go a little bit deeper into these. Then we'll look at the prerequisite, or we'll also look at prerequisite, and then we actually create a sample Oracle database instance. And then how do you connect it using any client tool like SQLnet, or you want to test it out and say telnet or to the database port to see whether the ports are reachable. And finally, we'll terminate this database instance. And any issues, any troubleshooting will be covered here. Now we constantly update this guide. So if you hit any problems, reach out in our WhatsApp group or our support team, so that they can help you further in deploying any Oracle RDS on AWS Cloud. So let's first begin with the introduction. I've already briefly explained that you can do different type of databases. I think if you're following the module, we have already covered a couple of other databases like Microsoft SQL Server or MySQL servers on this RDS. Now, when you deploy the Oracle database can be deployed in one of the three methods. First is self-managed, and self-managed is you're going to install an EC2. We covered in one of the previous modules EC2, which is nothing but a virtual machine that you get. Either you can deploy a Windows virtual machine or a Linux virtual machine, and then you run not the database or install database the way you used to do it on-premise. If you're coming from Oracle background, you download the software and install it. So it's no different than on-premise, but you can deploy like for like. This is called as self-managed on EC2. Now, another one is called as fully managed, or this is through RDS, Amazon RDS, relational data services, where most of the cloud automation will be done by AWS. And this is what we are going to look at here. And within fully managed service, there are two options that are available in we call Amazon RDS, where you don't have access to the underlying operating system on which you're installing or you are installing that Oracle database, or you get an Oracle database. There's another one which is called as, which is introduced recently, which is RDS Custom for Oracle. It released a couple of months back. I think it's late 2021 or early 2022, like that, where you have RDS Custom for Oracle, where you also have access to now virtual machines. So if you look at the access on who has access to what, application optimization, all those things, like the responsibility within RDS, two type of RDS is shared between the client and the customer and AWS. So in Amazon RDS that we are going to show today here, we are going to pick Amazon RDS, and in this Amazon RDS, AWS is going to manage everything right from database backup, operating system patches, high availability, scalability, operating system maintenance, server maintenance, etc. You only look at the database part, application optimization part. Everything will be handled by rest. Everything is handled by AWS. That's what we're going to look today. In RDS Custom for Oracle, as you do, I'm going to show you as well when to select or where to select RDS Custom or Amazon RDS. So in custom, AWS is going to manage the actual virtual machine, the hardware part or the virtualization part. But operating system, some part is done by managed by AWS, but rest most of the tasks are managed by its customers' responsibility to patch it, to do the backup, etc. Depending on like what kind of a configuration you have in custom. In a nutshell, you have access to the operating system. So some part will be shared across these two. So I'm not going to go into detail about custom because we are going to select Amazon RDS here. So, and when you're deploying, at the time of deployment, you get this option of whether you want Amazon RDS or RDS custom. And this, when you read it, it's self-explanatory. It says custom means you have an option to customize your operating system and infrastructure and so on. Now, so that is on Amazon RDS and Amazon custom. Now, within the RDS, you have a couple of options, and I'm sure you're familiar with the region availability zone by now. So the availability zone and regions provide you high availability within a region or across region. So you can deploy these databases like that or across region for high availability. So when you're deploying the RDS, you have a couple of options or on Oracle RDS or most of the RDS that you deploy relational data services. You have a deployment where you have single availability zone availability type is of single availability zone, which means that you have the databases running on one availability zone and your services or your servers are connecting to this one particular availability or the RDS or a database instance on one availability zone. And if this availability zone fails, then the AWS is automatically going to migrate that database to another availability zone. So if you define, depending on the how you're deploying, if you say, I just want one node and there's no replication, then all will be connecting here and you might lose some data on this particular node if this Oracle primary RDS goes down. You can also configure it to replicate, which means I'm replicating it in multiple availability zone, meaning that you configure a primary and you also configure a standby or secondary, which is replicated across second availability zone. And this will be happening for you behind the scene automatically. And as we configure, I'm going to show you those options and how to do that. And if this primary database goes down, as long as you're using the virtual name again in the application, what that virtual name is, which we'll see, client will get a name when we configure the database, you're going to see that. So that primary database, if there's any problem, AWS will automatically fail over to here, and client will seamlessly connect to this here. There might be some applications, if it's managing the session, they might have to reconnect, and the new connections will come onto the secondary node. So um, the failover situation is like depicted in this diagram. You're where your primary database is not available, and the AWS is automatically synced it to the secondary, and then your application servers are connecting to this standby node here. And once this primary becomes available, or this database or this instance becomes available, this will become your new secondary now. And this behind the scene, AWS is going to do all those things. So earlier you used to configure data guard in Oracle. If you're coming from Oracle background, all those things are handled behind the scene for you by AWS, and that's the beauty of having it in cloud. And this is all done for you. So this is what we're going to do. On as you configure, I'm going to show you how to configure these things in that. Now these are the documentation links. Some videos are pretty good in terms of high availability, running Oracle database on AWS. All these videos and databases are helpful for you. Now prerequisite, you should have an AWS account, free or paid. We have covered it in one of the previous videos. And then you configure AWS CLI on your local system. Again, I think that is not required, but this is given if you want to deploy it using CLI, but this is totally optional CLI part. So this is where we'll begin with creating a sample Oracle DB instance. So I'm going to move on to the so you selected let me walk through, and then probably I'll go and create these things for you. So first you're going to select a region in which you're going to create this relational data services. I'm going to pick a North Virginia. You can pick anything. You search for RDS, relational data services, and then you go onto this RDS and you are ready to create the database. There will be option called create database. Here you'll be getting an option to standard create or easy create. And easy create is less steps, but pretty much most of the things are all auto-populated for you. If you're doing it, I always recommend to do standard create, so you get an option to select other options. And this is where you will be selecting Oracle, and then within Oracle, then whether you want Amazon RDS or Amazon RDS Custom. So that's what I'm going to cover. I'm going to pick it in the next part. So head on to the next part where we actually go to now cloud account in my AWS account. And this is where we're going to select. So I've selected the North Virginia. And then here, I've came to here via the RDS. I've searched RDS and clicked on this RDS here. And then on create the database. So this is where we'll be creating the database. Or so this is with the new option here. This is where we are going to create the database, and click on create database, and we'll be selecting standard create and my Oracle. So head into the next video. I'll be showing you how to do and the options available. So welcome back. Let's continue from where we covered in the first part, where I gave you an overview about the database options and that we're going to create or Oracle RDS database options. So now in this, we are going to actually create the database. So we go to this page here. And again, as I said, we'll constantly update this guide as new things come. So we'll be first selecting a region in which we are going to create the database and select the service as RDS. So I'm on a North Virginia here. You can pick any region on which you want to deploy the database. And then you select RDS here. So click or search for RDS and click on RDS relational data services. And then you can close this message here. You may or may not see this message, but this is where we go and create the database. Under here, click on create database. And then on the create database, we are going to select a standard create. Let me show it to you here. Now you can do a standard create or easy create. Easy create is for most of the things are already predefined for you. We're going to select standard create, and here you select which the RDS type you want. You want Aurora, MySQL, Oracle. We are picking Oracle here because we want to select Oracle database. Now, this is one of the options I mentioned earlier in part one where I said Amazon RDS and RDS Custom. So custom will give you an access to the operating system, and you have more privileges and more management on this. Something similar to what you do in Oracle Platform as a Service, Oracle VMDB system, and so on. So here we are going to select Amazon RDS. I want to select this option for now. And here, the architecture, which is a multi-tenant architecture. What this mean is that till 11G, everything was single tenant. From 12C onwards, it came a multi-tenant architecture where you have a container database and pluggable database. So 12C till 12C, you have the pluggable and container database. Oh, sorry, you can have a non-CDB or non-multi-tenant architecture, but from 19C onwards, multi-tenant is mandatory. And it's always good practice to use multi-tenant where you have a one container database and multiple pluggable database as well. So I'm going to select this. Again, your team will be able to tell you about whether to select it or not, or whosoever is giving you a comment. If you're a DBA, you probably might already be familiar to use multi-tenant architecture. Then if you scroll down here, this is where you have, if you're doing here edition, enterprise edition, depending on what options you select, you will have an option of standard edition or enterprise edition. Because you have selected multi-tenant architecture, that's only available in enterprise edition. So we'll be selecting, or again, check what your database requirements are, but usually you select multi-tenant with enterprise edition for production kind of workload. But you may have a standard edition depending on what kind of a license you want. It's always cheaper in standard edition, but enterprise edition will give you a little bit more features for you. So we'll select this and leave it enterprise edition. Now this is where you have the database version, and in which you select what kind of a database you want. It's currently on multi-tenant, you only get 19C and 21C. If I unselect this multi-tenant, and this is where you will see multiple database, all the databases should also be visible um, here on this. So we're going to select the multi-tenant and leave it and pick up the default 19C database. And these are the different RUP or updates. It's basically January 22 and so on. Now, what kind of a template? Basically, the configurations. You want high performance, high availability, production kind of a workload, or dev test kind of a workload. I'm doing it for dev test purpose for now, but you can change these here. Now, this is where you say what is the database identifier, or here instance identifier, database, which is database one, or you change based on your requirement here. Now this is my system administrator password, or a user or a administrator in my database, which is a user admin. Here I can either set my own password or I can say auto generate. So we'll select auto generate, and AWS will show me the password only once. So I'll make a note once the database is created, then it will be automatically set and I'll be able to retrieve that only one time. So we'll keep it safe later once the database is created. Now this is where you see database instance class, which will basically how much CPU, how much memory, or what kind of a machine on which this database will be running. So standard class or memory optimized, more memory. Here like bus table classes, T class. So depending on what kind of a compute or operating system virtual machine shape you want, or CPU and RAM you want. Because it's a dev test environment, I wanted to keep it minimal. That's why I'm saying bus table class DB-T3 small, which is quite cheap machine. Now you can include all these configurations, other options as well if you want to do the previous version or previous old type of machines as well. So this is for that. Now here the underlying storage on which the database will write its data. So what kind of a database you want, or the storage you want, general purpose, provisioned IOPS, and then magnetic. We'll be leaving it again default. Your architect should be able to give you that requirement or use the default in other case. Storage, by default, we have 20 gig here. You can increase if you want. Auto scaling, which means in case your database grows, you want it to auto scale or increase the storage. It's always good practice to have auto scale, but what the maximum size you can grow, you can always select that as well. So I'll probably reduce this to maybe I'll say 30 gig for now, because it's a test environment. I don't want people to use or accidentally grow it bigger than it needs to be. Eventually, anyway, we're going to delete this. This is what I was talking about earlier. Availability. Do you want it in multi-availability zone, or you don't want database to be created? So if you go here, this is I've explained in the part one earlier. That's what I was saying about multi-availability zone. This is what I was talking about here. That do you want to put it into different availability zone or not? The prices will be higher if you do in a Standby. So for now I'm saying do not create standby. If you want, you can play with this and create a standby instance. Now, this database needs IPs, and or database will be stored or deployed, or this virtual machine on which database is running needs to be configured in a network or VPC. We covered in one of the networking modules, VPC. So what VPC you're going to select? You can either create a new VPC and deploy it there, or I'm going to for now use a default VPC, or you can create a VPC specific to your databases and so on. So I'll leave it to default VPC for now. And then again, subnet, in which subnet we are going to deploy. So ultimately, whatever you create, a virtual machine or a load balancer or a database, they will need IPs, and this IP will come from the subnet. That subnet is part of VPC. So that's what we are creating here. Now, do you want public access or no? In actual production, you restrict it and say only available within selected machines. So it's not available publicly over the internet. Because I want to test it as well and show it, I'm doing it on public access, yes. Otherwise, you can, in actual production environment, either you have direct connect, which will have, or site-to-site VPN, or a VPN connectivity from, so that the access is restricted. Or you can say people should never be able to connect to database directly. They will only be able to connect it from the application tier and so on. So for now, public access will keep it yes. Now, VPC security group, again, we covered, it's nothing but a firewall. So we will create a new, or you can use an existing. If you use an existing, you need to modify to allow the Oracle RDS database listener port, which is 1521. I'm going to select a create a new here, and VPC name will say database, and I'll double check here in my documentation. That's what we have done. We have created a new database VPC on here. I hope, and if you're not familiar with these things, in the networking module, we go in detail where we have explained, and the instructor will also tell you about these VPCs and the security and the firewalls. So security group, we have selected database, and then um, if you select the database, it will automatically create or open 1521. We'll double check it if it doesn't. So we'll say a database, and then availability zone. We don't have any preference on which availability zone to deploy this network on, or this database on. So we'll let it decide on its own. You can also look at the additional configuration, means where exactly or what is your database listener port. You can change that as well. So we'll be leaving it to default 1521, which is a database port. And then any additional configurations. So which is initial database name. So if we go down and scroll down, you can put additional initial database name as well. So we'll pick it database name, database 1 or database 01. So you have to create, otherwise it will not create the database. So you select database option, database 01, and DB parameter group. It's for basically the parameters for what parameters you want for this 19C database that we have selected. This is the character set for this database AL32 UTF your application will use. Now, automatic backups, you can configure automatic backup, how long these backups are retained. So for now, because and then later you say, if you have any backup window, like, oh, it should run every, like, basically night time or so, you can configure those backups as well. I am not doing backup for now. You can also enable encryption. So encryption, by it's always good practice when we say the data, when it's stored on AWS locations, the data will be encrypted using a encryption key, and that encryption key will be managed and created by AWS. They will not have access, you will have that access, but those are managed by AWS for you. So you can leave all these things default. Performance insights as well. You can use enable performance insights so that you can get a visibility of any performance improvement that it gives. You can also enable monitoring. You can also do alert log exports. And you can integrate with CloudWatch. Again, will be a separate module on CloudWatch, and in our DevOps program, we go in detail about CloudWatch as well. So you can push that data into CloudWatch as well. Now, other things, I'll leave it default. It's saying me it will cost me $27 per month. And that mainly because the shape I've selected was quite small shape. But because we are doing it in test purpose, we'll be deleting this database once it's created. It's mainly once we have configured and tested that we can connect to this database, then we'll terminate it because it's a demo database. So click on create database and then give it 15-20 minutes. Oh, DB name must be less. Okay, so because if you see my database name should be 8 characters and less, and that's why it failed. So I'll go up and say my database name here and say probably might change K21DB01, and I think I'll go up here K21DB01, and let's try creating database again. And now it's creating the database. It'll take some time. So in the meantime, I'll go through, we'll give it a couple of minutes, and I'll come back onto the last part where we'll be on next part, where we'll be checking the connectivity. We'll get the passwords as well. So it's creating the database. If you see now here, you'll get the view credentials, and we'll copy this. Remember this is important. Remember this, you don't want to miss this because it will be copied, or you will have this only for one time. So make a note and save it safely. So I'll say notepad. I'm going to save it, this password, and say file. You can always reset this password later. So I'll say save and say AWS RDS password. And then again, don't try this database because I'm already I'll be deleting it after use. So it's still creating. We can refresh here and it says it's creating the database. The database is, these are the details. I'll come back once it's created. I'll come back onto this. While we wait for this database to be created, I would like to invite you for a free class that I'm hosting and bringing in another AWS expert. We'll be talking about the certification program on AWS Solution Architect. We'll also be looking at how you can quickly kickstart your journey if you are new to AWS Cloud, or if you're already working, how you can take your career to the next level, also including things like job opportunities. And we'll briefly touch base other important things that you should be learning on cloud. If you're interested, go to this URL k21academy.com/AWS SA02, where 2S AWS SA02, and select a date which you're free over the next 1 or 2 days, and then enter your name and email address and click on save my seat, and you will get a notification on the next class which are available, and you can join that free class. It'll be highly beneficial. So once you've registered, I'll come back onto this video and we'll see or continue from creating the database. So welcome back, and if you notice here, my database have been created now. I think it took almost around 20-25 minutes, but it might take slightly longer or quicker depending on the shape you have and the region in which you create and so on. But give it a 30-minute break and then come back and see database is created. So once the database is created, we are ready to test and say we can access it or not. Again, as I said earlier, you can view the credentials here, make a copy, final copy. If we close this, it will not be visible after that. So make sure that once you close, it will not be generated again. Yep. So that's important thing. So once the database is created, it's available. Now we are going to test it using the telnet. Now in my laptop, I've already enabled telnet. And telnet is to query to see if I can reach the database port or net. So telnet is already enabled. If I see telnet is already configured, but if you don't hit the steps, you go to, or maybe go to under your computer, go to settings, and under settings, you are going to select on apps and then programs and features. And in the program and features, you will be looking at term features. In order to enable telnet client, you go to settings from here. Click on settings, and there you ultimately what we want is we want to go to this option where we say turn Windows features on and off. So I'll say Windows. So search for turn Windows features on and off. Click on this link here, and here in this turn Windows features and on, we'll scroll down and look for telnet client, and this should be enabled, telnet client, and that's what we have already done. So once the telnet client is enabled, you have the telnet working, or telnet will be configured on this. Now we need to find out the connectivity details of this database that we have just created, basically the client address there or the database listen address that we'll be using. So click on the database that we've created just now, and here under connectivity and security, so this is all the details about, and you have connectivity and security monitoring, log events, etc. What we are interested in connectivity and security. So if we look at the connectivity and security, this is my endpoint. So this is the address or database listener address, and this is the database port. So I'm going to do here and say telnet, and the whole listener address or where database is listening, and 1521 is the port number which I've configured. And if you see now, the database is connected here. Now in certain scenarios, your database, the connection may not work, and that connection may be, if it doesn't work, first check under the listener that we create, or the security list we created, or NSG we created, network security group we created, or security group we created, that has the connectivity open or not. And for that, we'll be looking at security. If you look at security, under that there is a VPC security group. So if I open this link, that will take me to the compute or security group. So it's taking me to EC2 console, and EC2 console, my network is associated in that EC2 console. So I have security group. So if I scroll down here, we'll have security group, and the security group is the one which we created security group database earlier. If you see in under that, this is selected. In that security group, inbound rule, which is I'm saying 1521 port number is open or not. So it's allowed currently from this machine, which is my own machine. So I've already configured this. For some reason, if you don't get that, if you see connectivity not happening, come here and see that port number, this is open or not. Now this is my IP address, which I think it was already added, or it should probably, I think I created it in past. So we'll search for what is my IP, and I'll tell you other option as well for you. So if you look at my IP 81.150.9.251, 81.150.9.251, and 32 means how many IPs? 32 is one IP, which means this IP address. This is a CIDR range we discussed and looked it into earlier in networking module. If you want to allow from other clients as well, what you're going to do is you say add a inbound rule and say edit inbound rule. And this is if it doesn't work for you here. So we'll say add rule, and I'm going to use Oracle RDS. By default, when I select Oracle RDS, it will take 1521 port number. By default, say source is custom, and say if I want to allow from all over the internet, so 0.0.0.0/0 CIDR range from where I'm allowing, and save rule. The first entry, first inbound rule was for just from my machine, from my laptop. Rest is from this. So as long as you have this, the network connectivity should work. I hope that makes sense. Now, other scenarios where it might not work is where on your Windows laptop, you have a firewall which is not allowing 1521 ports. And typically that happens, we have a laptop, office laptop, or if you're connected to VPN. We've seen this when we are looking at SSH connectivity on PuTTY, or EC2 connectivity as well in past in one of the labs. So that basically, just wanted to recap on, click here and say telnet, this telnet is working. If it's for some reason it's not working because I've used the wrong port now, it will wait like this and it eventually will fail. But because I've already enabled 1521 port number from my internet and from my laptop, it was working. So that now from this laptop, as long as I can install any SQL client, it should work. I hope that makes sense. So I have to make sure that I have an inbound rule allowed from internet here. This is again covered in the guide. Now you can do you can also connect using the user ID and password that we created. Right now we have done the telnet, or you can have any SQL net client and then use that. That completes how to create this database. Now before we go, make sure if you've come so far, you don't forget to terminate this, and also share the screenshot of this screenshot that you've created the database, RDS database, this screenshot, so I can see that yes, you have actually created it and posted it in a WhatsApp group. So I'm aware that you've come so far here. Now, final thing before we close this, make sure you terminate this, otherwise it will be charged. So go back to the same database, search for the database you have, under actions, we'll say delete, and then some other things which I'm going to show you here now. So we'll terminate as well. So I'm on here databases, RDS database. I've selected this database here, and from actions, I'm saying delete. You can stop it as well. You can reboot this. You can delete this. You can take snapshot. Snapshot is a point in time um, uh, view of the database, and you can do other things as well. So I'm going to first select here and say delete, and it's saying, do you want to do a final snapshot so you can create the database again if you want from this stage? I don't want that. I've already done this. This is just for demo purpose. It's asking me to acknowledge that yes, I want to terminate. So it will also delete all the automated backup, including system snapshot, whatever it has, point in time recovery will no longer be available. And then I have to type here and say delete me. So delete me word to verify that yes, actually I'm want to delete it and not deleting it accidentally, and click on delete. And this will now terminate the database as well. So that completes our instructions. Let me do a quick recap on what we have covered in this three-part video series. Troubleshooting, or other thing is, if you hit any problem, the troubleshooting section will be covering those. So have a look at the guide as well. So what we covered in part one, I gave you an overview about the different type of, a very high level overview about different type of databases that you create. Within that, Oracle RDS, and we saw you can create on virtual machine, or you can create on a fully managed, which is of two type, RDS Custom for Oracle or Amazon RDS. And then we also looked at briefly about the high availability within single availability zone or across availability zone or multi-availability zone as well, so that your Oracle RDS will automatically migrate in case of any disaster or any failure. With that, this is Atul from Team K21 Academy, and go through some other videos on the database module. We have a lot of other videos as well. Well, that was a video taken from our step-by-step training program for AWS Cloud Engineer and Solution Architect, both for certification as well as a job, where we take you from a complete beginner, talking from introduction to cloud as well as AWS, creating a free trial account, installing command line interfaces, security in AWS, object storage options, or creating virtual machines like EC2, storage options like S3, configuring networks like load balancers, Route 53, load balancers, auto scaling, and then VPC for virtual private cloud networking, subnets, CIDRs, configuring site-to-site VPN, database services, including RDS for Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL, Aurora, application messaging, like things like SCS, SNS, SQS, configuring infrastructure as a code, CloudFormation for configuration management, designing and architecting on AWS Cloud, covering things like well architected frameworks, and then finally preparing you for the job where we give you the project work, where you work on nearly real-time project work on what you're going to do on industry. We also give you sample questions, interview questions, as well as exam questions. We also cover 40 plus step-by-step hands-on lab, covering from complete basic labs to identity and access management, different type of storage services, compute, that is EC2, the networking like VPC, monitoring, auditing, logging, automation, databases, microservices, and event-driven architectures like your Lambda and functions, and then configuration management and automation. And if you want to know more about this step-by-step comprehensive training program, also, if you're not certified or if you're already certified, how to learn all this so you get better, higher paid job, I would like to invite you for a free class, approximately 90-minute free class, where I'm going to bring another AWS expert, and we'll talk about how to get a much higher paid job, including certification as well as doing all these hands-on labs. So go to this URL, k21academy.com/AWS essay 02. Select from here the date on which you're comfortable to attend this free class, enter your name and email address, and click on Save My Seat. So you'll get an email notification with the time on which we are doing the next session. And I'll see you inside that free class. It's totally free. URL is k21academy.com AWS SA02. With that, this is Atul from Team K21 Academy, and will see you in another video.